Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has presented a white paper on the economy in the parliament. Well, it's actually black and white because the whole purpose of this has been to present the UPA years 2004 to 2014 as black and then the last 10 years of Modi government as white. So spotless is that white that not a single drop of ink has been spilled on demonetisation. Try it. I have the link of the paper in the description. Do a word search for demonetisation. And while you're at it, try searching for unemployment. Nearly 60 pages of text, 20 years of the Indian economy, and it's as if demonetisation never happened. And employment doesn't really matter. So how much of this report should you be buying? What is right, what is wrong, and what is plain invisible? Hello and welcome to The Bond Economist, your one-stop destination for professional advice on the economy. My name is Arudeep Nandi, and today we are doing a dispassionate analysis of the Finance Minister's white paper on the economy. In particular, we answer three questions. First, what are the points that the government is making? Two, how much of those points are true? And three, what are the things that have been conveniently glossed over in this paper? As always, if you like such content, please feel free to subscribe and support me. But look, before we get our hands dirty in this whole UPA versus NDA akhara, here's a very simple question. What counts as good management of an economy? Well, you might think you have the answer to this. Higher growth. Which is why people keep comparing growth rates in UPA years versus NDA years. Now, that doesn't quite make sense for two reasons. First, yes, the government has a lot of influence on growth, but there are limits on how much it can control growth. For instance, if there is, say, a recession globally, India will inevitably get impacted. Exports will get hit. Investments will get hit. Employment will get hit. And if the global economy does well, that will help India too. Or let's say global crude oil prices jumped from $75 a barrel to $120 a barrel. Of course, growth will be impacted. And secondly, the question is not just of the quantum of growth, but actually the quality of growth. Look, at some level, high growth is easy. You can just open the taps in the government exchequer. People will have lots of cash in their hands. Consumption will go up and that will bring up the economy. But that's not really good growth. Why? Well, because one, government debt shoots up. Two, if investments are not keeping in pace, but you keep boosting consumption, then too much demand chases too less goods, so inflation goes up. Higher inflation means that the central bank has to step in with higher interest rates. Also, higher domestic demand means higher imports. So when imports are too high compared to our exports, roughly speaking, this means when our current account deficit is high, dollars are escaping the country. You then need to urgently find a way to plug that hole with foreign investments. So how do you know if a government is managing the economy well? Well, ask yourself, is growth strong? Are consumer and business sentiment strong? Are there enough jobs? Is the private sector investing? Is inflation under control? Is fiscal and current account deficit under control? Are banks and the financial system stable? Is the government able to take policy decisions quickly? Is law and order stable? These are what are known as macro fundamentals. And these are most of the things that the UPA government got massively wrong in their second term, 2009 to 2014. And this has been the crux of the Finance Minister's white paper. And look, the Finance Minister is not wrong. There were multiple power centers within the UPA government. The Prime Minister had very little control over his own ministers and bureaucrats. Remember that time when Rahul Gandhi tore up the ordinance that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had supported? Meanwhile, skeletons of corruption cases were tumbling out of cupboards. The whole bureaucracy was in what was known as policy paralysis. Why push any files when no one knows who's in charge and what's going on? Naturally, investments slowed down. Meanwhile, reckless lending, political interference, and lack of good regulation led to a crisis in India's banking sector as bad loans soared. Now, in the middle of all of this, Pranab Mukherjee came in as finance minister, arguably, in my opinion, one of the worst we've had in recent times. he seemed to think that if you are the government, you are always right. The Indian state was spending copious amounts of money, fiscal deficit was out of control, we had higher inflation, higher current account deficit, and then in a stroke of what I can only describe as policy foolhardiness, Pranab Mukherjee announced the controversial retrospective taxation to raise large tax demands on transactions already done by Vodafone and Kane. So you're literally going back in time, changing the law, and now saying, too bad, you're in violation of that law now, pay up the penalty. They had such a disastrous effect on India's image that the term tax terrorism started being used for India. Our government was being accused of holding anyone at gunpoint to extract taxes. No wonder foreign investments to India slumped after that move. It is said that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had opposed this, which is the least of what you would expect of a trained economist. But what you would also expect of a Prime Minister is that he ensures that his Finance Minister does as he says. UPA too got the plot so wrong, be it on the economy, be it on governance, be it on corruption, be it on messaging to the public, that they virtually handed Modi the Prime Ministership on a platter in the 2014 elections. So the white paper talks of all of this in great detail and, might I say, with a lot of enthusiasm. But then there are also a number of things that the paper conveniently glosses over. First, the paper seems to paint UPA 2 and UPA 1 with the same brush. And politically that makes sense. You want to show that the other side is uniformly incompetent. But the fact remains that UPA 1 actually did pretty well. India had some of its highest growth rates during UPA 1, 2004 to 2008. Now, the paper seems to dismiss this as the afterglow of the reforms and the infrastructure projects done by the prior Vajpayee government, as well as, of course, better global growth. But that sounds like a gross oversimplification. UPA 1 actually kept fiscal deficit under control, arguably even better than the Vajpayee government. Both inflation and current account deficit were also kept under control. The government had passed the Right to Information Act, MGNREGA, which is the government's rural employment guarantee scheme. By the way, this is still being championed by the Modi government as a major way to relieve rural stress. And interestingly, the National Food Security Act passed by UPA 2, guaranteeing subsidized food grains to almost 2/3 of our population, has not only been continued by the Modi government, but actually been converted into a free food scheme. And for all the image that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has of a weak Prime Minister, he actually had the guts to stand up to his left allies and push ahead with the India-US nuclear deal. So UPA 1 clearly did a fine job. It was capable of handling the economy just fine. But of course, none of this nuance gets covered in the white paper. You know the other thing that this paper also pretended never happened? Demonetisation. That's right, not one mention of it in the whole document. I mean, if the narrative is that look how UPA messed up and how the Modi government was this knight in shining armor that rescued India, clearly even the government now is tacitly admitting that it no longer sees demonetization as part of that rescue mission. And look, if this is really a white paper on the economy that looks objectively at the last 20 years, and it's coming from the Ministry of Finance, then you should be covering both the hits and the misses. And it's not just demonetization. Take FDI for example. So this is a chart from the white paper showing how much FDI has risen since the UPA years. But again, this isn't the right way to look at this, because you need to look at it as a percentage of GDP. India's GDP is also growing, so it's natural for most things to also pick up. And once you take FDI as a percentage of GDP, the picture looks very different. Net inflows in the last 7 or so years have halved from 1.6% of GDP to 0.8% of GDP by fiscal year 2023. Ironically, making it at the same level as it was during the darkest of the UPA 2 days. Want another problem that the government doesn't enjoy talking about? the current state of India's consumption. GDP statistics are already registering how weak consumption is. And the problem that economists face is that we just don't have enough data on this. Whenever any official data or survey suggests something remotely embarrassing, the government either suppresses or discredits its own data, citing data quality issues. For instance, the 2017-18 Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. This is done by NSSO, National Sample Survey Organization, a government department with a long and rich history. According to news reports, the Consumption Expenditure Survey found rural demand was falling. Between 2012 and 2018, the average monthly amount that a person spent fell by close to 4%. Mind you, this data was coming up post demonetisation. So what happened to this report? Guessed it right. It was scrapped for data quality issues. By the way, the same survey was again done for FY23 and FY24. Again, reports nowhere in sight. They are now saying that they'll be released after elections. Similarly, the current state of unemployment in the country, no one knows for sure. Now, the FY18 report suggested that unemployment rate in India had surged to a 45-year high of over 6%. This caused a huge furor, and the government blocked this report, saying that it was a draft version. I remember, in fact, there was this disastrous press conference that Niti Aayog hurriedly organized at the time, where the then Vice Chairman Rajiv Kumar tried to incoherently explain how the data was yet to be verified. Who will verify the data that has already been verified by the statistical experts within the government? No one knows. Even if you consider the current survey, the details are worrying. The casually employed, which is the green line here. So these are casual workers plus, say, helpers in family enterprises, where incomes are generally much lower. Their share in the workforce has zoomed up. And instead, the share of regular salaried workers has come sharply down. So on the one hand, the general narrative seems to be that demonetisation, GST, Make in India, etc. have formalized more and more of the economy. But on the other hand, government's own data is suggesting that more and more of the workforce is dropping off salaried work and becoming casually employed. And even within salaried workers, the average income went up from a little less than 16,000 rupees per month in 2018 to around 20,000 rupees per month in 2023. So it's gone up by around 27% in the past 5 years. You might think that a 27% increase in income is great. But hey, the government's inflation data also tells us that 100 rupees in 2018 was worth less than 70 rupees in 2023. So prices have also gone up by over 30%. So on one hand, your income has gone up by 27% in the past 5 years, but the price level has also gone up by around 30%. So adjusted for inflation, salaries may have actually shrunk. So not only are there lesser share of workers in regular salaried jobs, those who are in those jobs seem to be earning lesser than they were a few years back. Look, there is no doubt that there are a lot of things that the NDA government got right. A much stronger Prime Minister's office, a more action-oriented bureaucracy, focused not just on reforms but also their delivery. I mean, the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile program was essentially to ensure that government money is going directly into people's bank accounts. It was revolutionary. As was rolling out GST after years and years of no resolution. And the government has been very disciplined in bringing down fiscal deficit. It has invested massively in infrastructure. In fact, we've done an episode of The Bond Economist on this. I'll leave a link in the description. So sure, this has been a big improvement from the headless chicken days of UPA 2. But that said, not everything is hunky-dory. And by selectively covering only the hits and not the misses, the Finance Minister's white paper is less of an objective assessment of the economy and more of essentially a propaganda document. In other words, the white paper is in fact saffron from the BJP lotus. For more such insights, like, share and subscribe to The Bond Economist.